What's up, CineNerds? I'm JP Cross,
And I'm Ryan Newhouse.
and today we have an interesting one. So, we are doing Cyborg/Slinger, the Albert Pyun director's cut of Cyborg. Um, what spawned this is, if you've watched some of my reels, I have been pretty vocal about the Yippee Ki Mother video that's been doing these Albert Pyun releases. Like he's done the director's cut of Captain America. He's done a couple other director's cuts with Road to Hell. Um, there's a couple more, and some of them are escaping me. He's got one that's getting ready to come out called Interstellar Civil War, which is another Albert Pyun film. But he just recently he had all these on pre-order. I actually pre-ordered this last year, the Slinger director's cut, Albert Pyun director's cut of Slinger, and the only way you can get this is through the Yippee Mother video and on Blu-ray. And it's an interesting cut. I'm gonna say this, and it's it's definitely cleaned up from the Nemesis cut and some of those older cuts, because some of this has been released in the past. Um, but this is very polished and cleaned up compared to some of those older cuts. So I was really interested and I've been really excited. I've been really vocal about being excited to get this cut to actually sit down and watch it. So, but we got a copy for me and got a copy for Ryan, and we both watched it this weekend.
I just want to say thank you as well. What's the gentleman's name again? Because
His name is Kenny.
Kenny. Kenny, thank you very much. I appreciated this immensely. It's a sweet addition to the collection, and a great review. But I do have the question that JP's probably already asked you: is when are we going to get radioactive dreams like this? that's that's the one I'm trying to get. So
Yeah, I think mine and his. I think my first message to him was like, "Dude, radioactive dreams. Like, I will do anything
yeah,
to
no, that
get
that would be spectacular.
to get a restored version of radioactive dreams." And
Because Well, in all honesty, when I was watching this, that was the first thing I kind of thought of. Unfortunately, was because the even though it is a cleaned up version and it's beautiful to see the intended story. There is definitely that same element of me, like when I watched Radioactive Dreams on YouTube for the first time. So it was definitely a little hard to follow, but the story was so much. I did appreciate the story so much better. So,
on this or radioactive dreams.
oh, sorry, I'm talking about Slinger. Sorry,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't real clear on which one you because yeah.
No, yeah, I was going back and forth. I was comparing the video styles because of
Mm-hmm.
the way that it's deteriorated over the years of Radioactive Dreams and this cut, this Albert Pyun cut. By the way, somebody did something and I can't get it out of my head. They said Albert Pyun 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 Pyun. I can't stop thinking about it, so I'm saying that in my head and I say his name. But no, that the cut of this though is spectacular. It's superb. It's fun. I enjoyed this cut because there's a whole different all the way from the beginning through you get the intended what Albert was trying to deliver, and versus what the studios and Jean-Claude Van Damme ended up making.
And it is a different. I mean, so well, before we dive into that, so you watched both versions. You're correct.
So yeah, I watched Slinger and then I watched the Cyborg version. Yeah.
Okay. So I did the opposite. I watched Cyborg actually a couple days before we got these Blu-rays in the mail. So I watched Cyborg first, and then when this came in, I sat down and watched Slinger. And I only watched it. I watched the in color version, and I watched the black and white version of the same cut. I didn't go into the Nemesis cut or the commentary cut. So I didn't actually go and watch those to know if there was any differences between that Nemesis cut and this version. Other than I did click on the Nemesis cut and saw that the video quality obviously was really deteriorated in that Nemesis cut.
So when I was looking into this a little bit more, because I didn't know this was originally called Slinger, by the way. This was all news to me. I just knew that Cyborg was a movie I saw when I was a kid, and I really thought it was a cool sci-fi action film. And so hearing that there's a whole other version of this, spectacular. But getting more into this was that this was intended to be a black and white opera, a rock opera, and it didn't happen out for obvious reasons. But I mean, so there is that black and white copy on there, is what I saw, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't get to watch it, but now I'm like, I want to go back in and I want to see that one too. Is that one more music heavy?
It's the same cut. It's just in black and white.
Oh, okay. The way
Yeah.
they were said it was supposed to be a rock opera, I got a little excited for a second. I
Well,
was like, "Whoa.
because that was what he envisioned. With if you notice the music difference between
Oh, yeah."
Slinger and Cyborg, there is a distinct music difference. Now, I don't even rightly think that the music was completed. Now, I think some of this music was the intended music, but so much of this director's cut is obviously unfinished. There's a lot unfinished. There was a lot of dialogue, I'm sure, that was going to be changed, and there was obviously some of the inserted cuts, and you can see, like, watching this, if you get this, you watch it, there are like super polished, and all of a sudden there'll be a 2 or 3 second cut or a 5 second cut of something that is more deteriorated, then it goes back to a more polished. So I feel like maybe because that's what I always heard understood was he wanted this to be more of like a rock opera, uh, type film, and so I would say with I don't know for sure, but my and what I would imagine what he was thinking was that this still wasn't completed, obviously.
Did you happen to hear how first of all, the story of how he wrote it, and second of all, the music he was listening to when he wrote it?
I did, but I can't remember right now. So go ahead and tell us.
So, when I was a little tyke, a few years before this, about 86, 87, I got my first record ever, and I was so pumped. It was Def Leppard "Paranoia." And that's what
Yeah.
he listened to write this script. I was like, "Get out of here!" So it was kind of fun in that regard. I'm not a big Def Leppard fan anymore. Of course, that was when I was a kid, and I thought it was awesome. But to hear that kind of warmed my heart a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did read that, and so yeah, I did. I was trying to remember and I couldn't, but yeah, no, that I remember there was a Def Leppard. Man, some of that old Def Leppard, like Pyromania, like that album Pyromania was so fucking good. Like I still go back and listen to Pyromania.
All I whenever I talk about Def Leppard, since I heard the album in the late '90s, Bloodhound Gang, when they do the drummer from Def Leppard only has one arm. That is one of the best lyrics I've ever heard in my life. Anyways, I digress.
All right, so initial impressions, we really hadn't even dove into that. We've been talking about other
No, yeah,
stuff
yeah.
with this film. So I'll go ahead and dive into mine. My initial impressions, like when I first saw Cyborg, I went to the theater and watched this. This is one because I was I was big into kung fu films and ninja films at the time because of Canon Films. I was big into Canon Films, and and obviously, you know, a lot of these video store type films. I was really into. I was really young, but I was really into a lot of this stuff. Then I was also really into Van Damme stuff already at that point, and because I had already watched Black Eagle, and I was a huge fan of No Retreat, No Surrender, where in both of those films Van Damme plays bad guys in, and so I was already a fan, and I believe
Don't forget
Bloodsport.
Double Impact.
I believe well, but that was later.
Yeah, that was later.
Um, but I believe Bloodsport was already out at this point. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, and so I think I feel like I'd already seen Bloodsport. Maybe I can't remember, but
Bloodsport's number 2 to Kickboxer to me in the John Claude world.
and so I remember seeing the trailers for this film and going, "Man, I have to see this." And I went to the theater, like young, whatever year this came out. What year did this come out? 89?
89, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like 10 years old, and I was like a 10-year-old going to the fucking theater to watch Cyborg. So I was a fan, and I loved this film as a 10-year-old watching it in the theaters. I thought it was great. Um, as I got older, I've watched this film a lot through the years. Like I fucking loved this film. So I knew X amount of years later, not as a kid, I didn't know the drama because we was pre-internet and whatever. But years later, I knew that the Nemesis cut existed. I knew that there was a director's cut. I knew that this was originally supposed to be called Slinger, but I never did watch the Nemesis cut. And so this is actually my first time watch of like a director's cut because I didn't even watch that Nemesis cut of this film. So that's why I was super excited to actually see it for the first time, this director's cut, like a more polished version of this film. So this initial time was my first time watch for this director's cut, but like a huge fan of the film in general growing up.
What's funny about this movie to me is that I told JP before we started filming that I have not watched this since the 90s, early 90s at that. I watched it maybe 2 or 3 times. I loved it. It was great, but there's always new movies coming out. So, once you see a movie, you just really don't go back. So I went back to this and because of this review, but at the same time, getting to see the Slinger cut and the Cyborg cut, it was cool to see the differences. It was cool to hear the story and the lore behind why the differences happened. Cool to dig into the backstory of behind the scenes, the music aspects, all the things. It really also there's two different stories going on here, almost completely. But one is like a Satanistic future, and the other is just a end of the world disease future. So it's
Mhm.
really kind of odd the way that Albert's vision was versus what the studio tried to make happen. I'm not even gonna say the studio. John Claude Van Damme and his buddy that went back in and made it what we know, this copy of Cyborg
Mhm.
today, kind of, they kind of made it what it became. But I think the story that Albert was delivering was better and more superior, in my opinion. So the initial impression, basically, long story short, great sci-fi movie, great futuristic movie. Very, very, very impressive and cool to see the different takes on this. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So if quick summary, we're not. I'm gonna do a quick summary overview of both films real quick. So
Oh boy.
if
Oh
you've
boy.
ever seen Cyborg, it is about a, like what Ryan just said, a post-apocalyptic world where a plague is overrun everything. People are dying from this plague. This cyborg is sent to get information on a cure for this plague, and she is trying to get back to Atlanta. They are in New York. It starts in New York City. She's trying to get back to Atlanta. She meets a slinger, which is played by Jean Claude Van Damme. His character's name is Gibson. And there is a group of people that is led by another character named Fender, who is the main antagonist. Well, he kidnaps the cyborg. He takes her to Atlanta. He wants to plague. He wants to cure for himself so he can have control. Um, and Van Damme's character Gibson chases them to Atlanta to in order to save the cyborg and get her to where she's going safely. So that's the overview of the original theatrical cut. So let's talk about Slinger. It's the same summary, same idea, but it's not a plague. This is a post-apocalyptic rapture. To me, I understood it as a post-apocalyptic type rapture apocalypse world, and that Fender's gang are actually Satanists that are basically work for the devil, and um, they're doing is in the name of Satan, and he says this multiple times throughout the film, and they're not even there's and it doesn't even talk about a plague. It's
Yeah.
she is actually getting information to get the power grid back on, power and water, and
Technology being the focus, though.
technology. Yeah. So it wasn't even a plague, it was technology to bring things back to life and bring order back to the world with power and water because people are starving, they're thirsting to death. It's apocalyptic type world. So the whole overview is a different overview, but it's still kind of the same film, but with different cuts. And we'll dive in, but there is a couple of these cuts in the Albert Pyun version that I really, really like. Um,
The-
there, it's weird for me. This is a weird one for me because I've been so excited to see this director's cut because I knew it existed forever for such a long time. But I was such a fan of the original that now that I've watched them both finally, um, there's things I love about the Albert Pyun director's cut, but I'll be honest, there's things that I still love in that original theatrical version. Uh, we'll dive into that a bit more as we talk about this, but as a fan of the as a fan of the if you're a fan of the theatrical version, then this is a must. I feel like this is a must watch.
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen the theatrical and you see what bothers me is this is a good example of what happens all the fucking time in Hollywood. When a studio thinks they know better than the director or the writer, and they take over the creative control and they try and make it into what they want versus what was intended,
Mm-hmm.
which sometimes, I mean, and I say this very, very loosely, sometimes it works. In this instance, to me, had they given the due diligence to Albert to do the film with his story, but with the polish that you got out of the theatrical release, it would have flowed seamlessly. It would have had a better story. It would have had more depth. He might have needed to trim it back a little bit, but other than that, it kind of flows and makes more sense, and it has a deeper meaning to me. So that's why I will lean towards the story for Slinger completely. And mind you, I also want to talk about the Slinger aspect. So he's saying Slinger like people are supposed to know. So Slingers are essentially like futuristic protectors and guides. They get you from one point to the other, is my understanding from this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why the original cut is called Slinger, because it's more focused on Jean-Claude Van Damme versus the cyborg woman. Um, did you notice when she took her hair off? What did that sequence remind you of? What did that kind of claymation esque
Oh, it
cinema
was Total
remind you of?
Recall. Total Recall.
All day, dude.
Mm-hmm.
I actually wondered if it was the same prosthetic face they used from Total Recall, but I couldn't
It
find anything.
it was very similar, and which I believe this predates Total Recall, if I'm not
It
mistaken.
does.
Yeah,
But I was waiting for her when she turned her head for the face to start separating and Arnold's face to come out, like, going all
yeah.
sideways. I was like, "Oh." No, it was awesome, though, in that moment. But the other thing I wanna talk about too here is, so there might be more than a lot of things that you guys recognize in the scenes of this movie while you're watching it. So this movie is basically, a lot of people don't know, but there was a sequel for Masters of the Universe that was gonna
Mm-hmm.
come out.
And
And,
and Spider Man.
well, I was getting to that, and
Yeah.
Spider-Man too. Not 2, but Spider-Man also. And so and Albert Pyun was trying to sorry, he was trying to convince the studio to allow him to film them both simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So he kinda came up with this movie while he's doing that, yada yada. But a lot of the things from the sets of Masters of the Universe, Spider-Man movie ended up in this movie. But
Mm-hmm.
what I'm more curious about was those fucking motorcycles look straight up like the bikes from Beyond Thunderdome from Mad Max. Did you catch
No,
that?
they are actually from. They are reused props, but
They,
not
yeah,
from. But not from that. They are actually from. Oh God, what was the name of that movie? It was.
I don't believe you, because those are the exact, that whole shell, the whole round shell, was Mad Max all day.
Oh, you know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about another movie that we're going to be reviewing.
Oh, okay, okay.
Okay, so yeah, I'm thinking wrong. Um, we're filming like we always do. We're
Even
filming multiple films tonight,
now,
and so
when
yeah,
we get to that movie, you'll know why we're mixing those up, by the way, but we won't talk about
yeah,
that.
we won't talk about that, but we are filming another movie that is very similar to
Yes.
this one. So
Now, and some other so JP, do you happen to know where this location was filmed?
I don't know where this is filmed.
Wilmington, North Carolina.
You know what? I did know that. Yeah, because
I was
we
gonna
they
say,
used to film
you
all this
should know
shit. Yeah,
that.
they used to film because Wilmington was the Hollywood of the East Coast at one point
What?
until yeah. They actually called it the Hollywood. They were calling it the Hollywood of the East Coast because every film was like being filmed there and TV show. Um, until um, some things got politicians got involved and things got screwy, and then that's why Atlanta started getting all Georgia started getting all these films, and it was politics between. Yeah, so it
I
was.
think
There's a whole nother conversation on that. A
I
long one.
think only North Carolinians, am I saying that right? Carolinians? How do you say that? Anyways,
Carolinians.
Carolinians, I got it. Second try. I think North Carolinians dubbed it the Hollywood of the East Coast. I don't think anyone else did.
No, that's they were literally calling it that. They really were, and because they were filming so much
Sure.
with like Dawson's Creek was filmed there. There was all these movies were being filmed there, and even the Trailer Park Boys moved to Wilmington after they left Canada, and a lot of Trailer Park Boys was actually filmed in Wilmington, like at one point. So it was a lot of shit that was going on there for years.
Um, let's talk about Jean-Claude Van Damme beating the shit out of one of his one of the cast.
Is this the where the guy he blinded?
Jackson Rock Pickney is the guy's name. He was a giant ball black guy, and there's a scene where he's coming at Jean Claude, and he's got a knife in his hand, and something happens when Jean Claude kicked the knife. It was supposed to kick the knife out of his hand, but instead he kicked the knife, not the blade part, obviously, but the rest of the knife back into his eye, and it caused permanent vision issues. He originally, I thought this was intriguing because the court did their due diligence here. He originally was just trying to sue Van Damme for 10K, nothing crazy, right? Well, they went so far into this, they found out that there was a pattern of John Claude Van Damme injuring other people on the set multiple times, and he never once owned it or apologized. And when they developed that pattern, they awarded him like almost $500,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that Jackson Rock Pickney dude, he made out okay from that movie. Not with an eye though. He lost an
Yeah,
eye, but he made
yeah.
out financially okay.
Yeah, I knew that he even went on to the Arsenio Hall show, and like Arsenio Hall actually asked him, "Have you ever heard anybody on set?" And Van Damme was like, "No,"
Oh yeah.
completely denied it.
That's yeah, he's full of shit. Um, and then what else? Jackson Rock. Let's see, Wilmington. Oh, so this was funny. So I kept looking at Vincent. Is it Klein or Klin?
I think
Vincent.
it's Klein.
Okay, Vincent Klein. I kept looking at him. I'm like, I know this dude. Why do I know this dude?
He
Why
was
am
in
I remember?
Point Break.
And Kickboxer 2. He was in both those films, but Point Break more than anything, you recognize him as one of the like kind of
Was
hoodlums.
he? He was. Wasn't he? Was he like a bodyguard or something in Kickboxer 2?
I don't know the role. I just know he was in it. I just remember him vaguely, but I remember more so from Point Break for sure.
Because I can't remember him in Kickboxer 2, and I have seen that movie because that's another Albert Pyun film, and I have seen Kickboxer 2 100 times, and for the life of me, I think I've never dawned on me that he's in that, but if he is, I think he's one of the security guys or something, but he's not one of the kickboxers.
Yeah, no, he's definitely not. But he would have made a great kickboxer.
Right.
But without those contacts in his eyes, he's probably just kind of looks a little regular, in my opinion.
He has odd eyes. If you go back to Point Break, like he has even odd eyes in that.
Yeah.
Like he has like
Well,
these. I feel like they're really blue, really popping eyes.
I guess with the limited budget of this film, which we won't talk about yet, but with limited budget of this film, they only had two sets of these contacts for him,
Mm-hmm.
and he kept losing them. And they actually had to hold up shooting this film. And when they they went to find him, everyone like stopped filming to look for these contacts. Here, they had shifted up in his eye. They were actually in his fucking eyes. And I couldn't, I was like, I was just laughing. A, I can't touch my eyes for contacts. So I respect anyone who does. But B, like, how would you just lose a whole ass contact in your eye? But yeah. But
Yeah,
anyways, go ahead.
I can't do contacts either. That's why I have glasses, so I can't touch my eye.
But the reason I was starting to talk about him specifically was because I didn't know that apparently he has a very high pitched voice. So
Mm.
the entirety of his voice in both versions of this is Branscombe Richmond. And if you don't know who that is, look him up. You'll know who he is real fast. You've seen him in so many. He's an American Indian dude with a mullet, and he always is wearing a choker. And he is quite definitively who Billy Ray Cyrus stole his entire style from.
I didn't look him. I did not look him up. I knew that this guy, another guy, voiced him. But now that you described him, I know exactly who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
he's been
Like
he's been
it's
in
the guy.
so
It's
much shit.
you're literally you're talking about the guy from Renegade, aren't you?
Yep. Yes, I
Yep.
am. That's funny. That's awesome that you do that. But I thought that that was crazy that they had to bring in somebody with a deeper voice to make him seem more, more just intense, more angry. And that was one of my big complaints, honestly, about the character was, and we'll get there later, but there is a part where he screams over and over for no reason. And I'm just like, Jesus, this guy, like, is he on roids? What is like, rah, rah, over and over. I was like, this is annoying.
And this is, and I wanna say this. This is one thing I liked about the theatrical cut better, and that is especially at the opening and some of the dialogue, the um, the director's cut. Albert had somebody different do a voiceover, do all for kind of some informational drop and stuff, and that voiceover character, I'm assuming, and from what I understood, was supposed to be Jean Claude Van Damme's character, but he had a different person voice him because I think he was what I read. It was saying that he was afraid that people wouldn't really understand Van Damme's
Because of
voice
his accent.
because of his
Well,
accent.
you know who he wanted to play the role of Gibson, don't you?
I do not, but if I had to make a guess, I would say Chuck Norris.
Your guess is spot on. He wanted
Yeah,
Chuck, he wrote this with the mindset of Chuck Norris doing this, and he was against film hiring Jean-Claude Van Damme originally because of that accent, just like
yeah.
you were just saying.
So this goes back what I was saying. This is one thing I did like better about the theatrical cut is that okay. So Albert's cut, I would have preferred him to have Van Damme's voice, me, because it didn't make sense. It didn't feel right with somebody a different voice, overdubbing the narration stuff as Van Damme's character. So either had Van Damme do that to make it uniform across the board, or the theatrical cut, the voiceover, like at the beginning, was Fender's voice, and I really liked Fender's voice in that theatrical cut in that dub, and so there's subtle differences that I thought worked better, and that's one of them.
So I think so. The guy who did the voice, that Branscombe Richmond, I thought he did one of those voiceovers. I think it was. I think it is him.
He may have done. He done some, but like if you go back and watch that director's cut, there's a different person in there that did
Gotcha.
Van Damme's narration, and it and if you it and maybe it is I don't know, I can't remember. It said that there was a different actor that actually did that voiceover. I don't remember who it was. It said, but I can't remember. But it just felt off. It didn't feel uniform, And as a musician, you know this. You gotta make things a little more uniform. They got to be consistent. And for me, with the audio side of this, with the voiceovers, the voice with it being Van Damme's character, it wasn't consistent. It should have been Van Damme's voice, or just cut that part altogether and to have Fender's character voice the narration, like what had happened in the theatrical version. Either way would have worked better, but and I'm not saying what Albert did was bad with what the narration was talking about. I actually liked the information drop. And that's one thing that Albert was always really good about doing, was he was very good at the drama. He's always been very good at the drama and adding more drama into a lot of his films. And so a lot of the narration was great. I just think that for it to be uniform, it should have been Van Damme's voice.
There is no there's nothing but a story about this and how this went down. But the story is that Jean-Claude Van Damme was part of a testing audience. He went in and watched this movie and the original intention of it, and he was so thrown back by what he saw and put off because it was low budget that he stayed in the theater afterwards, and some say he sobbed. I don't know if that's true. But he was so put off by it that he then approached the studio. And when he approached the studio, he asked with his own money if he could have X amount of months more to recut it and redo it. And he had already done work when he did, was it, I think it's Bloodsport. I think he
Mhm.
had work to do with the final product of that. So knowing that he was capable of it, they okayed it, which is what we all know as the theatrical cut, and that's what came to be. But I'm wondering, like, how that all I wanna know, I wanted to be a fly on the wall hearing the studio have this conversation. I wanted to be a fly on the wall hearing Albert have this conversation as well with the studio. I would like to know really the nuts and bolts of what went into this decision, because it's just so night and day different, and the story is so different. I know that also the original cut that he saw was it over 2 hours? It's over 2 hours, right?
Yeah, what I read online, it was over 2 hours. But now the director's cut that we have, it was only an hour and 22 minutes. It was actually shorter than the theatrical.
That's why I
So
was confused.
so like from what I read, that original screening was a 2 hour cut. Now whether that was wrong, what I read online is wrong, or there wasn't a different cut of this that maybe Albert lost control of and the studio has, and then
See, that's what I think happened.
and he recut with what footage he still had to
Right.
make the director's cut that we have.
Absolutely. That's what I think happened, 'cause, what I heard from that story was that it was 2 and a it was a little over 2, it was like 2.5 hours almost, and, I guess the original rating was a rated X because of the violence,
Yeah,
content in it,
language and
and
probably
yep,
language and
and
violence.
John Claude got it down to the window they wanted. He polished it up, and he made it so that the violence was toned down so that it could get a rated R
Hmm.
setting and be in the theaters the way they wanted it. So yeah, I would love to hear that. And I'm wondering, I wonder, like, because I don't know anything about, like, until you, I really didn't know much about Albert, and so I want to know if Albert and John Claude got along after this.
I read someplace um, that that they didn't talk. I think Albert was pretty bitter, and rightfully so. I mean, somebody takes something that you've worked hard on and put your heart into, and then it gets taken from you. It sucks. I've been there, and um, but from what I read was that they didn't talk. He didn't talk to him, but I guess years later, I read I read that they did actually meet and talk and were cordial and were nice. And Albert even went on record that he would still love to do another film with Van Damme. But this was before he got sick. Um,
Yeah.
so I think Albert obviously would have been welcome to have done another film with him. Now whether Van Damme would have been or not, Van Damme is one of those guys. He just I don't know. Everything I've read and seen with him that he can be difficult,
Yeah,
So
that's all I've heard was that he's hard to work with.
yeah. So I'd imagine that he may have not have ever wanted to work with Albert, but that wasn't what was I read. What I read was that Albert said that he would have still loved to have done another film with him. Then he had obviously got sick, and Albert did pass, a few years ago.
Y You know what's crazy is I can't remember, I wish I could remember the other 2 movies. Another thing I heard while I was looking into some fun facts of this movie, there's 3 movies that he had an opportunity to do, and he chose Cyborg. So he picked this out of the other 2 movies were, like, pretty decent movies. I wish I could remember, I can't though. But so he picked this out of 3 movies. So, he really can only be upset with himself. It's probably why he invested so much money into it, and paid for the recuts himself. And
Yeah. And watching this director's cut, I can understand why Van Damme would be unhappy with Albert Pyun's vision. Um, because it is obviously there is a lot of language. This was in the height of satanic panic as well, and so there was a lot more Satanism elements and whatnot,
Tipper
and
Gore, man, this was
yeah,
this was the whole era of
yeah,
all of the censorship and all the and if you were going down a satanic focused movie, like, obviously, these things have flown way more in the 2000s and 2020s, but in the 90s and the 80s, yeah, this was kind of
yeah.
taboo territory, so
So, and then the gore, because Albert's vision, it did have a lot more gore, you know. So I can understand why Van Damme was not happy with some of the things that was going on with this original cut. Now I think there's a happy medium. There could be a happy medium in between these two films. Um, but the theatrical version went a little far with what it took away from Albert's vision. But I think there's things that Albert could have done to tone it back some. I think some of the language could have been toned back some. Uh, I think,
fucker.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was a lot
The
of
fight scene, yeah.
yeah. There's lots of f bombs and stuff just constantly thrown around. That I just think some of that could, and now I liked a lot of the actual explicit language in this, but some of it could have been cut back because it did get a little like, come on, yeah. But some of that could have been cut back and reworded. I think some of the, Hail Satan could have been cut out. Now I think the Expo drop at the beginning and the Hail Satan at the beginning, fuck yeah, leave that in there. We're doing this for Satan, yeah. But as the movie kept going on and the Hail Satans kept getting thrown out there, it's like, okay, we know, we get it, you know. Um, so I think some of those things, I think there could have been a compromise in there if if the studios and Albert were both willing, you know.
I don't think there would have been. I think this kinda went the way it did because of the timeline. So, with Masters of the Universe and Spider-Man both being, pushed to be made, through Albert and I believe Canon Films was the name behind it,
Yeah, yeah. Canon,
and so but
Albert was supposed to film them.
so
Both were picked up as properties for Canon Films, but Canon went bankrupt.
well, that's because of this film. This film is actually nicknamed The Death of Canon Films.
Well,
And
but this, but I,
hold on, because I know you got a lot to say about Canon Films. I
but
know you do.
that's not true though.
Well, that's what it was nicknamed because the 87 was when they filed for bankruptcy. This released in 89. Now, part of that though was not because of this film. This film just unfortunately got a bad rap because of when it came out, being the last film that would be made with Canon Films. Now, from my knowledge, and JP will correct me afterwards, but part of this had to do with those two films I mentioned, with the Masters of the Universe and Spider-Man, because there were checks written to Mattel and Marvel from Canon that bounced, and it kind of sent ripples in the wrong directions, and this is where everything spiraled. So go ahead. Now you can tell me your side of this and what you know.
So the death of Canon Films was this. Number one, they were pumping out more films than they could afford to every year. That was the first mistake. Now, it was what actually made Canon Films, but it was also part of the death of Canon Films. They were spending more money than they could afford every year. So now, what you said is true. This gets kind of credited for the death of Canon Films because I believe this was like the last theatrical film release that Canon Films did. But this film made money.
Oh yeah,
And
without a doubt.
this film made money, but the death of Canon Films was not. This wasn't the cause. It was not Cyborg. The cause was Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. That was a Canon film, and they dumped every dime they had into that film, and it bombed. And that was the nail in the coffin for Canon Films, was Superman 4.
Yeah, when because I didn't know that was a Canon Films movie, and so when I saw that, when I was going down the rabbit hole with all this stuff, it was, I was like, "Oh, why did they touch that?" Like, all I could think is that, and I understand, so and they were trying to do the basically, from my understanding, Canon Films was essentially putting out films, low budget style, in hopes to make enough money to keep the studio afloat while they were trying to work towards bigger projects, and that's where their system failed.
Yeah, and they probably would have been okay. They probably would have pulled through. They had a good plan, but they when they spent all this money for Superman, that was the death of Canon Films. They should have never put that much money into Superman and Christopher Reeve's hand, and that's what killed the studio. It definitely
I
was
don't
not Cyborg.
I don't think it was Christopher Reeve's hands. I think it was the story. Like, if you why'd they see that script and be like, "Let's go." Like like I don't know. That was rough.
But I think Christopher Reeve had a thing for the script. I believe he had his hands in the script. That's why I say that. But and I love Christopher Reeve. I'm not dumping on he's my favorite Superman. He is my Superman. But I can admit Superman 4 is trash. Complete trash.
I mean, I'm talking trash about it, but I'm not gonna lie, I enjoy it.
All right, Slinger. So, what'd you think about the music difference? Because the director's cut was the initial plan was a rock opera, and then the
Right.
theatrical was not that at all. But it was still had. What did you think about the differences?
I think you kind of nailed it on the head earlier when you said something like you felt like the score wasn't quite finished. Like, there are parts where it just cut out and you were like, "Wait, where'd the music go? Why is it so quiet?"
Mm-hmm.
And that could be just because of the the version we're seeing, but at the same time, when the music was hitting, it was like great, and it was great in the way that like you hear those like out of control 80s leads and solos in a good way, like it, like especially in the fight sequences. I was like, okay, now this is cool, this has got that vibe. I feel like I'm in the 80s. I'm loving it. Great.
Especially that final fight. That final fight scene, the music in that final fight
Yep.
scene was fucking on, dude. Like it was on in the director's cut of Albert Pune's director's cut, and even the opening, guitar solo in the opening of the movie. I mean, it was fucking cool. Now, I think there's an iconic theme for me seeing the original Cyborg so many times. There is a pretty iconic theme in that uh, that I always remember and I always really like. But man, especially once we got to that final fight scene, within the director's cut, that music hit hard and like it was very like inspirational, like, oh yeah, let's fucking do this.
I have a horrible thing where I will hear 2 notes of a particular song, and I'll be like, "Why does that remind me of another song? What other song does that remind me of?" Then my head starts spiraling, and I start going down a rabbit hole to find that song in my head, and I'll find it in the correlation. And this movie, I kept thinking, I'm like, "Why is this fight sequence so the ending fight sequence in the rain?" I think, first of all, I think this is a superb fight sequence. I think this is an excellent fight sequence. Whichever version you're watching, it works.
Yeah.
Except for the "Rah!" where he's yelling over and over. That's a little annoying. But other than that, the fight scenes, great. But did you play through and finish Last of Us 2?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So the Abby fight,
Hmm.
like that, I feel like this movie, and I think there's obviously other movies, but I feel like this movie influenced that maybe a little bit because there's a lot of similarities, oddly, but it's just so good. It is a great fight sequence. It's so fun. I'm a big fan of it, and the other cool thing about this is, as I was watching this, I'm like, you know what? I never watched any of the sequels. I had a want to watch the one because I guess what's his name, Klein comes back in one of the Nemesis movies, like part 4, part 3, or something. So I want to kind of check that out. Now I want to go down the rabbit hole. And despite I know people complained about 2 and 3 being horrible, but excuse me, um, I have to see these now because they're all going to be futuristic sci-fi. I'm in. I love it.
Well, the studio went on to do like Cyborg 2 and whatnot, which actually
Yeah.
had Angelina Jolie in it. Um,
And
who else was it? Jack Palance or who was it? It was in
I
that.
always forget the actor's name, but he was Casey Jones in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, is he in that? I feel like Jack Palance or somebody's in it too. I may be
Maybe
wrong.
I just remember I saw the imagery of Angelina Jolie next to him.
Um, but Albert Pyun went on to do because now Albert Pyun kind of created this whole cyborg genre that came out. Uh, because he did Cyborg, and then once he went on to continue doing his own films, he did the Nemesis movies, which is kind of what you're talking about with Nemesis, Nemesis 2, and so on. And so, some of those Nemesis movies are just fucking amazing. I've always loved those
All
Nemesis
right,
movies.
rewind. So I thought the name of part 3 or part 4 of Cyborg was Nemesis. So you're
No,
telling me
that's
there's a whole series of Nemesis movies?
yes. Albert Pyun did a whole
Yes,
series
yes.
of Nemesis movies. Yes,
Okay, I got my work cut out for me. I got
yeah,
let's see, what did I got? A few weeks ago, I bought the Leprechaun collection, so I finally will see part 2 and on. I'm gonna get the Tremors collection because JP is so incessant about it, and now I got Cyborg and Nemesis movies to watch, apparently.
yeah, yeah. A different studio probably is still a branch of Canon because Canon did actually still work as I think under MGM or another film studio for an X amount of years after it even went bankrupt. So you did get Cyborg 2, and I believe even maybe a Cyborg 3, but wasn't, the Albert Pyun films. Like Albert went on to do the Nemesis films, and studio did other Cyborg films, a couple of them here and there. And you got a lot of little random like copycats later, how these films do. You get one that does well, like Cyborg made money, so another studio grabbed the second American Ninja. I can't remember his name, but the one that's not Michael Dudikoff, and did like Cyborg Cop. So you started getting a lot of these low budget cyborg different
So
genre movies.
hold on. So that was what you just said, Michael Dudikoff, and it reminded me one of the choices between. I know all 3 movies that were offered to Van Damme. Now, it was the sequel, Chuck Norris sequel, Delta Force. He was going to be Delta Force, either 2 or 3.
Did know that, yeah.
It was that Cyborg, and then American Ninja 3 was going to be the other one, and he chose Cyborg out of those 3.
And American Ninja 3 is the one that had the American Ninja, I'm telling you, went on to
Yeah.
do Cyborg Cop. And I can never, it's like something Bradley. I can't remember his name, but, because Dudikoff didn't come back for that third one. He did come back for part 4, but I think Cannon threw a lot of money at Michael Dudikoff for him to come back because,
Would you say he had to take some time Dudikoff? Sorry.
So
Ah,
another big difference with these films is the endings. So the theatrical ending, we talked
I'm
a
glad
little,
you brought this up, but go ahead.
we talked a little bit about the ending, with the music, the main fight scene, blah blah blah. Good wins. Van Damme in the theatrical version takes the cyborg Pearl, I believe her name is, um, to where she's going, and basically there's this scene where they're like, "Oh, well, thank you," basically just blah 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 blah. A lot of exposition. And as Van Damme's leaving, Cyborg actually looks at and says, "For some reason, I feel like he's the cure," which I didn't actually never understand that. How is he a cure for the plague? But um, whatever. So
He
and
d
it ends.
he didn't need the help. I think that's why that was being said.
Yeah.
And I feel like that Cyborg also knew, like, so to me, that they have a nefarious vibe about them. These people that are trying to restore the technology, or whichever version you're
Well,
watching.
yeah, and that's where I was going to get at with the other version. So to me, there's not a nefariousness in that ending with the theatrical. But if you go to the director's cut, yes, it's very nefarious, and because he gets there and drops her off, and it's very, it feels very like, oh, we're going to we'll have control of power and water now, and it was basically like, yes, we're going to have control of this
Yeah,
planet, you
we're gonna
know,
run it. Yeah.
yeah, and it felt very, like you said, very nefarious, but also after this rolls, after this ends, you get a very Terminator scene with the time traveler that comes back naked, uh,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
which was I get it, I get it. This was because before Albert got sick, he was planning on a Cyborg Nemesis prequel, And um, yeah, it was weird. And I'm gonna actually have to ask Kenny about this because I'm sure he has the information on this. So like this Cyborg Nemesis movie, if you go to Albert's IMDb, it says it was released in 2013. But I looked this film, I could not find where this film exists anywhere. Um, so I think this was maybe filmed. It actually said it starred Sasha Mitchell, which actually really kind of interested me too, because he went on to be the kickboxer, and you guys know him from Step by Step, played Cody. Um, so at that point, I was kind of interested, like where was he going to go with this film? And there is a short on the Blu-ray set of this Cyborg Nemesis short uh, with some test footage and whatnot. Um, so I don't think that this film is done. If I had to guess, and I'm gonna ask Kenny about this and wonder if this is actually maybe something that they're going working on trying to maybe get completed. I know his widow, Albert's widow, is working. That's one of the things they're doing is with these films, getting some of this stuff released and trying to get some of his films finished that he wasn't able to finish. So I'm wondering if that Cyborg Nemesis movie is one of these ones that they're going to end up working on, because I would be interested in seeing it, but I don't know if I like that I don't know if I like that in this director's cut. You know, um, it felt a little out of place to me. Um, I guess just years of
I,
me seeing Cyborg and then seeing this, it felt just a little out of place. But I did love the nefariousness of the people when he dropped Pearl off. In his ending.
I think that it would have looked better. I think it's just harder because of the cut that it is, because it's unpolished, it's not finished, and so, like,
Yeah,
I feel like if we got that little ending on the end of the theatrical, then things would be a little different, but no, I can understand where if because of it being off too, it definitely throws you off. You're like, "Wait, what the fuck? Where did that just come from? That was weird."
yeah.
Kinda threw me off for a second. Um, I don't know. I didn't mind it. It was fine. It's what it is, but yeah, I prefer the theatrical kind of better because of that.
Well, I like Albert's ending better with the nefariousness of the people of Pearl and the people he's taking them to, her to. Um, I just don't know if I like the cyborg coming from the future part of the ending. I like the nefariousness part. I think if we ended it there, like the theatrical, but with them being more nefarious feeling, I feel like that was could have been just a really cool ending to just end it right there. You know, and you could still do your prequel. There's nothing to sit here and say that you couldn't do the prequel still. I just think stopping right there, it's just okay.
Right
These
there.
these 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 people are fucking evil just as much as Fender was.
Yeah, no, I listen, I'll tell you what, the original cut too to me, like, I'll wait. No, I'll wait. I'll save it for my rating.
Okay. Well, box office and budget. I'm assuming you looked at this.
Well, I know we got the thing, but we were watching it together, so yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. So the budget on this was 500,000, which is a very low budget, and this film is beautiful for $500,000. Now, I know that's not counting whatever Van Damme put into this film with re-editing it, and I know that this isn't. Also, there was a lot of cut costs that had already been paid for the Master of the Universe sets and the Spider-Man sets that were Albert used for this. So that's also where they cut a lot of costs. So they probably cut, you know, a lot of money in set designs. That wasn't on the actual budget for Cyborg. So that's why Cyborg actually had such a low budget.
I mean, yeah, 500,000, but then it made worldwide, it made 10.2 mil. So it did all right. So, as far as profitability and a budget, it definitely hit that mark, but I don't know if the studio still saw it as a win. But they did go on to make more, obviously. So
Yeah. All right, ratings. You want to go? You want me to go?
I'll go first because I know you're a little more passionate with this one. We'll dive in here. So to me, these movies, should I say, it's more of a comparison kind of. There's a lot going on here. So you've got the story and the synopsis that JP gave in the beginning. But there's also another little bit of a story going on here, and that's that this is a revenge arc for Gibson. Um, that that's that Gibson, yeah. Um, he had a love interest, and there was 2 kids, and, the Fender, found them and hurt the people that he loved, and, he thought they were all dead, and he's vowed vengeance on him, and so when he has the opportunity to help the cyborg, knowing that they're fighting against these pirates, as they're called in the movie, it kinda unfolds from there a little bit, and he's more vested in it because he wants to get revenge, and all the way like, behind me, you see this crucifixion scene that JP put up with, the boat, for those of you who are able to watch. So there's a scene where there's a boat on the shore, an old wreckage, and it's got its, mast up still, and Fender, crucifies him, he puts him up on this. When he's up on it, the little girl, Haley, from when his people were killed essentially, she is still alive, she's grown up now, and she's wearing a necklace, and she walks up and sees him. And this is a cool little subtle difference in uh the director's cut versus the theatrical. It was just like, hey, are you coming? And in the director's cut, it was, does he mean something to you? It was a little
Mhm.
bit more deeper,
Yeah.
and this also prompts Gibson to start kicking the shit out of this mast and have a new surge of energy to try and break free. So there's whole bunches of going on in this movie between the fight against these pirates, these horrible people, Satanists, however you want to view it. You've got a revenge story arc happening here. You've got so much happening: sci-fi, future, robots, fight for survival, humankind. Cyborg was always a solid flick to me to begin with. This just gave the story a lot more depth because I really was focused on the story piece in the director's cut, and I enjoyed it immensely. Is this movie, a 5 nerds? No. But is it a fun movie? Is it an amazing watch? One that I loved as a kid and I love now still because of this? Absolutely. So for me, this one's gonna sit in at a 3.75 nerds.
Okay. And is that what you're rating both of them, or just overall
I
both of
I
them?
kinda well, I mean, are we doing individual ratings here?
We can, if you wanted to.
Ooh. See, you know what? I'm gonna stay the course because they both have good qualities and bad qualities, and I think you and I just kind of discussed a lot of that where these two, if they're fused together in the right streamed way, it would go well together. So I think
Yeah.
they're both in that same vein. They kind of balance
Yeah.
out to me.
Okay. I don't think I disagree with you. I think, and I touched on it a little while ago. I feel like there's elements in the theatrical cut and there's elements in that director's cut that there's a happy medium in there. If you combine some of it, that you could have a perfect anime western style post-apocalyptic film. And so I think there's great things from both, which I'm very partial to the original just because I've seen it 100 times. I generally love that film, and this being my first time watch for the director's cut. Now, I'll say I like the direction of the rock opera. I like the more drama and story driven that Albert did in the director's cut. Um, I think some of it could have been tightened up, and that's that happy medium I think you could find between both versions of this film. Um, and but there's scenes, kind of like you talked about with the Haley character, the daughter character, that were, and I liked how that played out better in Albert's cut. I liked that a lot of the flashbacks were very early on, and it moved the story forward a lot quicker. Um, I like things like the first big fight scene you get, like once they start traveling. There's a scene where a little boy's being picked on by these guys with the ball. He has his basketball and he helps him get his ball back, gives him this little kid his ball back. And when it gets to the first big fight scene after they're on the road after that, in the theatrical cut is basically, well, this is feels like, oh, this is supposed to be Fender's men, and I'm just fighting them, blah 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 blah, move on. Albert's version, they actually walk up on this basketball and you see blood on it, and he Gibson goes off and into the woods, and he finds that kid and his family slaughtered by those people that were fucking with the kid, like in the previous scene before then. And so that whole fight sequence, it actually has Van Damme going through the woods and killing these people, and then gets to the area where and the big fight scene is in the theatrical cut, and that is him finishing off the rest of them. Like that scene had so much more impact in Albert's version, and that's what I was saying earlier. Albert puts a lot more drama into what he's doing, and that's why that scene works better. And there's a lot of scenes like that that just work better because of the extra bit of drama that you add. And so that's some of the stuff that works very well in this director's cut. Um, but again, I stand by. I think there could be a happy medium between these two versions of the film. I think some of the action sequences, the cuts, I feel some of these actually work better in the theatrical cut versus Albert's. Albert has this thing, and I always said, and I think I've said this in a previous episode. I feel like Albert, because Albert does a lot of the slow motion stuff, and I feel like Zack Snyder was influenced by Albert Pyun, and I think I've said this in a previous episode. Um, I feel like there's a bit too much slow motion that he added. He does that in a lot of his films. And I think that's why some of the theatrical version of the Van Damme cut, as I'll call it, I think work a little better with some of the fight sequences. But the drama and still yet some of the fight sequences are they're the same. They're just cut differently, and they're great. They're both versions are great. So long-winded, sorry, but I wanted to throw a little bit of that expo out there. If I had to, I'm gonna rate these together like you did, and we're sitting pretty close to the same. I have a huge love for this film. You guys know I have a huge love for Albert Pyun. I'm gonna throw this one at a 3.6 out of 5
Lower
nerds.
than me. Wow.
A little lower. And the only reason I feel like, again, I still feel like there is a perfect sci-fi anime style live action film in here.
So
And it's just, I think both cuts aren't there.
I think that one of the reasons that I found this a little bit more appealing than JP is because, like he said, he's watched this hundreds of times. Not the director's cut, but he's watched it so many times. Whereas I was telling JP, I haven't seen this movie yet alone. The director's cut was the first time watch for me as well. But the movie Cyborg, I haven't seen since the '90s. So this was like a rewatch, first time all over again. So I just had a new fondness for it. I think just getting to see it again, it gave fresh eyes on it. Now you keep saying anime, and what I love about that is not only is Albert's version with the blood splatter and the spray and the gore very anime centric, but also the flashbacks to when Jean-Claude Van Damme's character Gibson is with his people, the woman he fell in love with, and they hurt the kids. Every time they go back to that, his hair is atrocious, and all it
Yeah,
reminds me of is Rurouni Kenshin. I don't
yeah.
know if you've ever watched that, but his hair is just as bad. So it looks just the same. It's a horrible wig, but that's all I
Well,
kept thinking of.
even simple scenes like at the beginning, and especially in the Albert Pune's cut, it's really evident, and I loved it. Like I fucking loved it. But like when Fender actually gets the cyborg, they basically they get to a gunfight when this building ends up falling down on Gibson Van Damme's character. Well, once they're gone, all of a sudden you see a fist come up out of the debris, and it just sits there for a minute, and the camera kind of pans, and it felt very anime. And there's so many scenes like that to me that feels very anime, especially like you said, the exaggerated hair. You know, felt very anime. There was so much that felt anime. Now, yeah, with me giving a little bit of a lower rating than Ryan, that's not me saying that's bad, that this film is bad. I highly recommend going on Tubi or whatever you want to go on if you don't buy the physical. Watch Cyborg if you've never seen it. I highly recommend it. I love this fucking film. I highly recommend it if you're a fan of the film to go on Yippee Mother Video and order this Blu-ray of the director's cut, because this director's cut gives so much more drama and so much more exposition to what was actually going on and what the original idea was. So it's with the highest of recommend both versions, you know.
Yeah, no, and many thanks again to Yippee for providing the copies of this for us to do the review with, because you're doing an amazing service here, sir, helping with getting these reimagined, not reimagined, but remastered movies out and in circulation. So we appreciate it immensely.
Yeah. And and there's so many Albert Pyun films out there that are such gems. And I'm a big fan of his stuff in the '80s, and I've talked about this.
Pew
I love
pew.
I love Alien from L.A. I've talked about obviously Radioactive Dreams. You know, one of my all-time favorite '80s movies is Radioactive Dreams, and Dangerously Close, Vicious Lips, like all this stuff in the
I
'80s. I was
I
huge
find
fan
it
of.
I find it so funny because when we watch Radioactive Dreams, and I didn't know anything about, I knew his works, but I didn't know anything about Albert Pyun until you had us watch that movie. And that even has a Pip Boy from Fallout in it that is
Hmm.
reminiscent of Fallout and inspirational to the Fallout video game series. Now you go further with this one, and this one also has some Fallout vibes too.
Hmm.
So, especially with the nefarious ending with the people that are in a vault essentially trying to take over.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I enjoyed it. I'll shut up. I'll quit rambling.
All right. You got any recommendations?
Hell yeah. So I'm actually going to do a twofer because we're talking about John Claude Van Damme, and we've already mentioned these in this episode. I'm going to go Kickboxer and Bloodsport because, man, if you need like a Rocky style movie that just gives you a jump, a jolt of energy or whatever, you're going to go out and take on the world for the day. Those movies just rule, and I do get annoyed by John Claude's slow motion stuff in those as well, but it's magical.
You know what? I was going to do something, but now that you said you're going to recommend Jean Claude Van Damme films, then you know what? I'm going to switch mine to a Jean Claude Van Damme film, and I'll save my other one for a later episode. And
Nice.
so I'm going to talk about, if you've never seen this one, highly recommend it. And it is another one that is a futuristic film, and it is the greatest time travel movie ever
Right.
made.
I knew it.
Time Cop. Jean Claude Van Damme's Time Cop. If you've never seen this film is like the perfect time travel movie, and it's a Van Damme film, and I love it. So if you've never seen Time Cop, fucking go
John
find it.
John Claude Van Damme it. All right, guys. That's a wrap pretty much. So CineNerdsPodcast.com is the website. You know it, you love it. Check it out. Go listen to some of our backlog episodes. And again, many thanks to our wonderful friends at Yippee
yippee You can follow them on Facebook, Yippee Mother Video, and their website's there as well. So yeah, check them out. Click like, follow, share, do all that fun stuff. Until next time, later.
Later.